Good, good.
All right, so I'm going to start. 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 Welcome, this is Chaumtoli Huq. I'm the editor of Law at the Margins. We'd like to welcome you to our Right to a Home event. Just a little bit background about Law at the Margins. Law at the Margins is a social media and law platform, and the goal of the organization is to amplify voices of communities that are marginalized by our legal system and our policies. So today we have a very excellent panel today regarding the right to a home. Today we have a very excellent panel today. So just before I hand it over to Eric Ortiz to talk about the Right to Home project, I'd like to first share with you just the agenda for today. The agenda is that we will first have a panel around race, COVID, and health. And after the panel around race, COVID, and health, we'll have a small break. And then we will have a second panel from grassroots organizers around. We will then have smaller breakout sessions, which we'll go into a little bit detail later, about how we could address some of the solutions to homelessness. And then we will close out listening to the UN rapporteur on the right to adequate housing. So just a couple of housekeeping for those who are watching through the Zoom room. I'll see you there in the chat. Please use the chat room to engage with us. I'll see you there shortly. Add a queue so that we can sort of field the questions. We want this day to be interactive. We know that those of you who have joined us are experts or working in this field, so that we can sort of field the questions. We want this day to be interactive. We know that those of you who have Great. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Eric Ortiz, who's the executive editor of Community-Based Newsroom. And great. So let us know if you're having any difficulties regarding listening. Eric Ortiz, who's the executive editor of Community-Based Newsroom. And great. So let us know.
Thank you, Chaumtoli. I know we've had a few technical difficulties. We're trying to figure those out. But thank you all for joining us. We're really excited to have everyone here for this event. I'm the editor of Community-Based Newsroom. It's a project at Law at the Margins. And we did a series called The Right to a Home. It started, we got this idea. Our work is grounded in raising up the voices of marginalized communities and people whose voices aren't always part of the traditional media. And so we wanted to work with the homeless community for this project. It was started, we had this idea, and the way this story came about is started working with Alastair. I was put in connection with Alastair Boone, who's the editor of Street Spirit, and she helped us get other collaborators, other partners. So we had 4 partners, street papers for this, and we worked together to cover issues that are relevant to the homeless. It was we published 8 stories in December 2019, and this webinar is part of that project. We're going to have, we want this to be a very interactive event that helps continue the work we did with that project. It's all about finding solutions to the problem of homelessness. It's still a huge problem, as everyone knows. Everyone is doing great work, and we wanted to bring people together who have lived experience and also who are allies and working to organize and working to find solutions and policies that can help end this housing crisis. So that's why we're here. We're going to have all of the editors from the partner papers give an introduction to the work they did, and then we're going to jump right into our event today. Want everyone to participate in the chat, and we're going to have breakout sessions so everyone can contribute. But thank you all for being here, and we look forward to having a great event.
Thank you, Eric, very much. This is Eric Falquero. I'm the editorial director for DC's street paper, Street Sense Media. We've been operating here since 2003. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with a street paper, they're mostly publications sold by people who are homeless or formerly homeless as a direct source of income. And most papers focus their reporting on social justice issues, particularly as they intersect with poverty. And they serve as a platform for homeless and formerly homeless writers. So through this project, we've been grateful to be a part of it. And we focused our reporting on homeless encampments in the DC area, as well as the importance of listening to people with lived experience, the expertise of people who have been homeless and have been through the various systems that the policies that our local government makes affect directly. Street Sense Media also has a case management program to help folks with connecting to housing, healthcare, and other benefits. And we also produce, in addition to the paper, films, original theater, podcasts, and other media. Thank you all very much.
Hi, I'm Amanda Haggard from The Contributor in Nashville, Tennessee. We're also a street paper, been around since 2007. Had quite a journey, went from newspaper to magazine, back to newspaper print. We're a bi-weekly paper. We brought on 2 of our vendors as part of this project to write 2 stories for the Right to a Home project. The first one was on the criminalization of homelessness, sort of a wide-reaching issue, looked at some solutions in Nashville and outside of Nashville. The second piece we wrote looked at healthcare and how it can both cause and exacerbate homelessness. Our 2 writers who are formerly homeless, Vicky Batcher and Jennifer Alexander, did a great job on that. We were really happy to be able to kind of showcase the work that they do for us all the time in more of a broad way. Thanks for having us today. This has been a really fun project for us.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Hanney. I'm the editor of StreetWise magazine in Chicago. We date to 1992. We also have been a newspaper and a magazine, and we provide social services, and we are a weekly. This was a great project for us to go more in depth on stories that we wouldn't have had time to do otherwise. We got a little extra help, and we also built up our vendor, Lee A. Holmes, who helped with the reporting on two stories that we did. The first was on food insecurity. We talked to the Greater Chicago Food Depository, which is the local branch of Feeding America. They've had an extended role now since COVID, since our story. We talked to other solutions to food insecurity, such as Growing Home, Farm on Ogden, other urban agriculture projects that maybe make food more cheaper and more accessible. And Lee talked about some of the programs he used. There is a website that they have that the Food Depository created to help people find soup kitchens, etc., rather than the tramp trail, so to speak. The second story we did was on veteran homelessness. Lee and I went to the VA hospital, the Jesse Brown VA Med Center, and we talked to Veteran Strike Force about veterans trying to find housing, basically just having not made enough money to live in a gentrifying city. And we also talked to civic officials about housing. We're really honored to be part of this project, and we're glad for today's developments, which take it in new directions since the COVID crisis. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Alastair. I edit Street Spirit, which is the homeless advocacy newspaper based in Berkeley, California, and Oakland, California. This project has been such a pleasure to work on. It's really fun to kind of unite these 4 street papers all over the country. And I think that the stories we put out present a really clear picture of the distinct issues, but also the common themes that we are facing when it comes to the crisis of homelessness in the US. So I'm excited to continue that work today by bringing together organizers and unsheltered people from 4 cities. So a little bit about Street Spirit. We are a monthly newspaper sold in mostly Berkeley and Oakland, California. We've been around since 1995. I myself have been editing just for the last 2 years. Our publisher is a nonprofit called Youth Spirit Artworks, which is an art and jobs training program for homeless and low-income youth. And Street Spirit, like these other papers, is written kind of by and for unhoused people as well as their advocates and allies. We're very deeply committed to reporting rigorous stories about the politics and policy that impacts the homeless community, as well as humanizing personal essays and poetry and sometimes even fiction. And our mission is to create economic opportunity for unsheltered people who sell our paper, while also providing a platform where those folks can kind of take control of their own narrative. So I'm really looking forward to the event today, and thank you all for having me.
All right. Excited to get started with the panel. Our first panel is going to look at race, COVID, and health. Reggie Black. Reggie Black will be the moderator. He is a reporter with Street Sense Media in Washington, D.C.
Hello.
Hey, Reggie, take it away.
Hello. Can you hear me, man?
Yep, you're up.
Hello.
Hey, Reggie.
I don't know if people can hear me, but my name is Reginald Black, and I am a lived experienced person with homelessness DC. I've also kind of worked on the Right to a Home project. And we want to try to sort of establish a dialogue about how interconnected some of these issues into housing instability are, and to kind of explore some of the differences in these interconnectedness, in trying to help our people who are out on the street.
Hey, it looks like Reggie froze. So when we get him back on, we're going to take over. We're going to go to the rest of the panel. Today we have speaking on our first panel.
Hello, Eric. How are you?
Hey, Vicky.
I'm Vicky Batcher. I work with The Contributor. I'm a vendor. I started out as a vendor and became a writer. I work with Amanda. She's wonderful. The Contributor is great. Really dealing with a lot of the homeless issues, and it was a great honor to be a part of the Housing is a Right project. And I look forward to writing more great articles and keep it in the public eye and find solutions.
Thank you, Vicky. Couper, great to have you.
Yes.
You want to introduce yourself?
Hey, Couper Rona, she, her, Couper. I'm here in San Francisco. I'm disabled firefighter. I'm like basically a homeless advocate as well as a street medic here in San Francisco. So just trying to make things right, make things fair, and make it matter in San Francisco.
Thank you, Couper. We also have Marcus Moore, who's with Picture the Homeless in New York City. And Marcus, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. So I am a member and a board member of Picture.
You want to go ahead, Marcus?
Okay, so I'm a member and a board member of Picture the Homeless.
Thank you. So I thought we could get started. Just talk about what we're going to talk about here today is race and COVID-19, this health crisis that's affecting the world, and specifically how is that impacting the homeless community, and also just look at all of you have different lived experiences, and just wanted to hear from each of you to start. What are people? Some people think of home. Wanted to just say, what are some of the myths and misconceptions that people have about homelessness? That you, what is one that Vicky? Start with you.
I think one of the great misconceptions is that every homeless person is an alcoholic or a drug addict, and I turn it around all the time and say, well, not every alcoholic and addict is homeless, and I always tell people to just go up to the person, talk to them, get to know them, and they become a real person. And I think that's where these relationships start. I know it has with me.
Thank you, Vicky. Yeah. That's a huge reason we wanted to do this project, is because, a lot of people say sometimes that marginalized don't have a voice. They do have a voice, often that voice is not heard. So Reggie is back. He's going to take over moderation. Thank you, Reggie. Nice to see you. Can you hear me, Reggie?
I can hear you now.
Okay. Vicky just spoke about the one misconception that people have about homeless. We're going to go around to the other panelists. If you Couper, do you want to, from your perspective, what is a myth or misconception people have about homeless community?
At the moment, and what we're living in this pandemic, that homeless folks have the virus. We're all somehow we're all sick out here, and it's the weirdest thing. I mean, I go from encampment to encampment, and I have not met one person that is sick, from this. Not one person. And people, the media keeps portraying that the homeless, we need to do this, the homeless this. Well, no, we're not the ones sick. It's the houses. It's the outside world. We need protection against them, not them against us. So that's one thing I constantly am hearing over and over again. And like I said, the news media is just pumping that in people's head as if we weren't already being at arm's length, and people are already not like walking around us. Now they're definitely not. They're definitely walking around us and trying to stay away from us. It's such a jacked up way to treat people, and also to feel like that. I just call it like hashtag alone and scared out here, because it's like because we're being treated so differently. Like we had it already worse before, but it's gotten a little worse since this pandemic. So that's just for as of right now during this that we're dealing with. It's definitely that people think that we're sick out here, and that we're infected, and that we're going to be giving it to the rest of the world. But it's not the case. So yeah. Did you guys hear all that?
Yes. Thank you, Couper. Appreciate that. Marcus, are you there?
I would.
So
I would. And the unique thing about these particular issues is that even though we kind of are under the same umbrella issue, the actual experience of people all across the country. Example, the District of Columbia is one of 3 jurisdictions that has a law that talks about how the city would at least provide emergency services, including shelter and some housing programs. And what I want to try to sort of glean out of that is that, do other places have these programs, and what is the experience in trying to interact with some of these programs? Because a lot of times, we hear about these new things being brought out in our community. We don't understand how long it takes to access that program, or what some of the rules around it are. And I would invite our panelists to kind of share sort of their take on their experience with services, and how does health and race play into that.
Put you back to easily.
Maybe
Marcus, you want to
chime in? Can you hear me? Hello. Can you hear me?
okay, this is Marcus Moore. I'm going to try to take a crack at the question. It's a lot of stuff going on in the background. You hear me first of all?
Yes.
Man.
Go ahead, Marcus. Looks like Marcus froze. Vicky, would you like to answer that question from your perspective? Oh, wait, looks like Marcus, are you back?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, great. Go ahead.
So I'm gonna try to take a crack at the question. There was a lot going on in the background, and so I believe I heard our host say something about services. I think I heard him say something about services. Because the question was kind of broken up, so I'm gonna try my best, right? So as far as services here, where I'm at here in New York, it seems like all they want to do as far as folks being homeless is give them services, right? And what I'm trying to say is about this give them services is that they don't have a problem of helping them stay description up where they're not functionable, right? They don't mind giving people services to a degree where it keeps them not being effective. I'm not too sure that makes sense.
Because a lot of times, you know, we
anybody hear me?
Hello, can anybody hear me? Can anybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, Reggie.
I was saying.
We can hear you.
I was saying to Marcus that that I know exactly what he means in terms of how services are provided, and that starts to speak to how certain factors about that individual engaging in some of those services changes their actual experience. And in a lot of ways, it leaves a lot of people who are unhoused more vulnerable than actually becoming unhoused.
So and so as far as people's health wise, it's to the point where now people are not getting the proper attention and easily is described as mental illness and stereotype. And I'm not too, I don't want to stray too far off the question, but so
Corona, thanks, Marcus. Couper, would you like to give your thoughts on that?
having some, okay, I'm back again. So I think that okay, I'm coming in and out of here, so I'm not hearing the full question, guys.
Hello?
Yes.
Marcus, we can hear you. Keep going.
Okay, so I think I was saying that as far as the services, you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. As far as the services, people are now.
All right, let's Couper. Looks like we're having a little technical difficulties with Marcus. Couper, go get your thoughts on this, and then Vicky. Go ahead, Couper. Couper, you here? Go ahead, Couper. Vicky, can you go?
Okay. I think one of the problems that being homeless that I discovered with the services that they didn't work. For example, we call 211. We're looking for housing. Okay. And they would give us just 2 numbers to call, and then we'd have to keep calling back because their information wasn't up to date. It also caused almost a full day. I remember one week that we had that it was like, okay, we can stop doing this and stop doing that. Let's concentrate on this. And that one day from 7 in the morning until 8 o'clock at night, we were running around trying to jump through all these hoops for housing. So we found a lot of difficulty with navigating through all these services, and 90% of them we didn't even qualify for. Being a family with 2 kids, and myself, I just couldn't believe how many turn downs we got because I wasn't a drug addict, I wasn't an alcoholic, my kids weren't in the juvenile justice system. It was just a circumstance of evictions. We can't help you. We can't help you. And that's so discouraging right there. I think some of these programs are cookie cutters. The people are used to hearing this and this, so they've already determined what they're going to give you before you even finish. I think the lack of listening and actually directing people in the right area, as well as checking out the service to make sure it's still in service, as long as they're up and running. Otherwise, you're running around and you're getting nowhere. I wish they had a one-stop shop place where you could go to this place and you could get applications for this program, and they could fax it to you. But no, you have to go there physically. So it was exhausting.
You raised a great point there, Vicky. Couper, can you hear me? You have any thoughts on? Just to follow up on Vicky's point, Couper, can you hear us? Hey, Couper.
I didn't
how is your
any of that? Any of that?
Oh, that's okay.
I was having difficult.
How has your experience been with services?
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Couper.
That's right.
Go ahead, Couper. While we figure out the video and audio with Couper, just Reggie, did you hear what Vicky said?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, Reggie.
I'm here.
So
sorry.
I'll go ahead.
major.
So Vicky was saying how a lot of times there's not a one-stop shop for services, and also that there's not a lot of listening from the homeless community to the service providers. You know, that was one thing we wanted to do with this project is, you know, have the homeless with lived experience be part of the solutions, be part of the reporting, you know, tell the story so that we could hear directly from the source. Because
that's very important. That's very important because we have power and control over what that narrative is for people to kind of fully understand the unique experience of the individual sort of like reporting on the content and the actual issue at hand. And if you have people that are you know, that have that type of experience that can tell you, you know, where the gaps are, it's essentially important, but it needs to go sort of, you know, a little further. And I think, I don't know if any of our panelists can speak to this, but I know that a lot of times us that are part of those conversations, we by default try to engage on that level, but we also see how systems are reluctant to that. But if you're talking about trying to get a concrete solution, and you know that not every, you know, shoe fits 1 foot, you know, it behooves us to be able to use that experience to better guide and be a part of the decision. And I wonder, what does that look like in different places around the country? Because I know myself, I right now serve on its Continuum of Care board as a consumer representative. And that work in itself is very difficult, trying to, you know, elevate the leaders that I see in the community. But I don't know if any, you know, tools like that to be able to allow people that are most impacted by the issue to not only report on and share the experience, but make decisions on it. I wonder, what does that look like in other places? Vicky, Marcus, Couper, how does that look in your areas? How are you able to sort of be at the forefront with lived experience, and what do you encourage some of your peers to do?
Personally, and I know people are shocked at this, okay? It was a chronic situation of homelessness for us. I mean, eviction after eviction after eviction. After 7 long years of waiting, listening, talking to people, I found out that when I got it together and I did it myself, things worked better and things worked faster. So many people are shocked that I never went through a caseworker to get housing. I simply saw the feed on my Facebook page stating that there were wait lists opening up for MDHA, which is our public housing here. And I filled out the application and I waited for the call. And 7 months later, there was a call saying that my name was next on the list. Did I want to come in, complete the paperwork, and get in housing, which was one of the greatest days of my life. But I think once we encourage more of, instead of relying on these services, but to have somebody help people to do it themselves. Caseworkers are underpaid and they're so overworked. When you have 300 clients that you're trying to get into housing, it's like that hamster going in that wheel. They're spinning their wheels and they're not getting very far. And I'm not downing caseworkers. But if those of us who have been able to do it ourselves can get out there and show others, you know, you can do this and you can get into housing much faster. Do
you have sort of any suggestions on how, the average consumer could go about doing that. Because I think one of the things that kind of fuels some of that overworkness for caseworkers and those behind the desk is that there's certain information that's not even really out there to the general public. Is that something you encounter in your jurisdiction as well?
When I found it on my Facebook feed that there was housing complexes that were starting to open up, affordable housing complexes, they were opening up their wait list. You have between here and there to fill out your application and get it in and get on that wait list. I think that would help. One of the things I personally would like to see in every major library, and I'm talking about like the one in Nashville, the big downtown branch. If someone, and I would be happy to do it, and get other people to do it as well, could sit in the library, use these conference rooms when these wait lists open up, get the word out. Because I had asked an MDHA worker that I knew from taking the bus for 2 years. She told me, don't bother getting on the wait list. You're going to have to wait 3 to 5 years for a place. That was discouraging. You also had to have good credit and all this stuff. And it was really discouraging to where I didn't even want to try for it. But I think if we had people with a little bit of, I don't want to offend anybody, common sense and computer literacy, I think we could help other people get into housing faster. And I think if it was centralized around the library, I think it would be a good thing. I think it would be a step forward in helping that caseload, but also getting services that they can use. And when you get into housing, most important, don't drop it. It takes a while to become acclimated to housing, to getting used to those little sounds in the middle of the night that used to scare the hell out of me, thinking someone was going to come in, this kind of thing. So I think once you get somebody housed, you need to keep with them for at least 3 months.
Yeah, I think that would be, a great suggestion for either Marcus or Couper. How does that piece about getting information into the hands of those who need it, who are?
I think that if you don't mind, I think that one of the things we lack is information out here. Can you all hear me? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. The lack of information is crucial because people need to be proactive in their housing search. You know what I mean? But like out here in San Francisco, like they call us service resistant. That we're service resistant. We don't want the services, but when they come offer the services, they say, well, do you want a shelter, or do you want this will lead you into housing? But like if it's not set to your needs, like maybe you have a dog or you have a partner, or they're not there at the moment, well then boom, you're service resistant. Well, when it comes down to them telling the mayor on the numbers, it's like, well, they denied our services, so they must not want housing. And it's like, and they ball us into that same little like jacked up little chunk. And it's not, we're not service resistant. The services are resistant to us. You know what I mean? And that's the rub, here is it there needs to be, the access needs to be easier to gain the information. People need to be proactive in their search, but also when they do get housing, there needs to be an adjustment period, like she was saying, like, because people can't just go willy-nilly, just go, into housing and just and expect to just be like perfectly okay. There needs to be, maybe counselors and or something along to help ease people into getting back inside. And that's one of the biggest things people are scared is to go back inside. People I speak to on the daily. So it's very important to have our cities need to have things set up in motion to prepare for people getting inside, but also not make it so fucking hard to do that. You know what I mean? It's very, very hard. I've been on the wait list for everything in the city for years. You know what I mean? And like, why am I still out here? You know what I mean? Like, but there's a lack of housing, but like, come on, there has to be something somewhere. There has to be a way for this to not be so hard. You know what I mean? And that's the thing. Simplicity is the key. And that's what some of these cities are not paying attention to, is one, they're not asking us. They're not asking us what we need. They're not asking us what our ideas are of this. They're throwing this ball of homelessness around to each other, these city hall and whatever, city leaders, but what homelessness is. And they're trying to jam everyone that's unhoused in that ball. But we're not all the same. We're individuals, and it should be based on individual, case by case, situation, because we're not all the same. And so what they're doing is they're making, if they do get housing, they're not making it, for that. Not everyone is a drug addict. Not everyone's an alcoholic. Not everyone needs to have what they call a payee. You know what I mean? So they're just putting everyone in the same thing, and there's no hope for change, or there's no hope for growth, and there's no really anywhere to climb up from. And they keep you at that low level, and that's it. You got housing, so we're trying to get you housing, and they just leave you. They turn around and walk away. And there needs to be more support. There needs to be more effort made by our cities to acknowledge the fact that, first off, we're human, and we're all like.
Couper, I like that you talked about a case by case basis, and I was wondering if
whatever
if Miss
you live in, all residents of that county, so they need to stop treating us like we're little kids. So that's what it seems like they're doing. A lot of cities are doing, especially San Francisco too, is very like they act like we don't know how to live, like we don't know how to do things. They treat us like very childlike things.
We have to start thinking, and we have to start thinking about their individual characteristics. And I want to try to ask Marcus this, but others can jump in if you want. In your town, do you see a correlation between those who are experiencing homelessness and health disparities in race? Because I think homelessness is one of those ways that people are led to certain physical forms of violence through either police brutality or just normal, crime. But is there a correlation between these things, race and that, and that dynamic? And what are you seeing on the ground in terms of who in your towns are people experiencing homelessness who have a certain level of health and possibly certain level of criminalization? Because in the district, we know 86.4% of people who are homeless here are African American, and 42% of those people have an underlying health condition. And we directly draw that line. There's a correlation between that person's unique characteristics and their experience with homelessness.
Okay, so here in New York City, there's no doubt. Homeless folks who are majority Black and brown people have been stigmatized and criminalized when it comes to minor defenses, right? And so people who are housed and not really understanding how people are criminalized and forced into these situations. And so here in New York City hate their homelessness. And so, but they portray to the world that they're doing all of this and they're all of that. And so the majority of people who are your street homeless people here in New York City, Black and brown people dominate that sector. And so that's what homelessness is looking like in the 5 boroughs of New York City. So you have Bronx, Queens, Manhattan, and also I believe I said Bronx, Queens, Manhattan, and different places in Staten Island. And since you know the coronavirus 19, you have had a lot of people really trying to find places to be and be safe from this virus, because you had the mayor and Department of Homeless Services doing street sweeps and trying to take people off the street and put them in congregate shelters, and people are rebelling. People don't want to do it, and these are causing it has caused situations where city officials using police like they caseworkers, right? Be back there again, like caseworkers. But what it's actually doing is making the people either be really forceful, don't want to speak to police. Is police is interfering in homeless people's lives, and it's causing friction. So I'm gonna stop right there. Yes, I stopped.
So how do we see promoting some sort of racial justice framework to the issues that are obviously plaguing all of our communities in terms of health, homelessness, and race? Are there concrete things that you think should be happening in all of our cities, or do you have something maybe your city does well on there or not?
I don't think I heard the question clear enough. I'm sorry.
Marcus, question was, what are some things that can be done to help fix that problem in your city?
I think that we really need to start really focusing on low income housing. Low income housing. That's a start. Low income housing, and that's the first thing. Low income housing. So what I mean by low income housing, ladies and gentlemen, I mean for people who are doing these little jobs, little restaurant jobs, who are making $30,000 and down. Not 50, not 70, not 90,000, but 30,000 and down. Because when these people get off from work, a lot of them, like nurses, aides, and security guards, they're going back to the shelter system. A lot of them are not going back to their 1-bedroom apartments. They're not. They're going back into the shelter system with the masses of people in their community who are experiencing a tremendous amount of homelessness.
I think these things warrant a larger conversation among us who are sort of like involved in the work and are doing the things that we are here. And I think that we need to really start honing in on sort of a unified way to address these disparities, because once a person falls into that unhoused situation or homeless situation, it's very tough for them to sort of pull themselves out. And there are people that can do it, but you have to put a lot of time and energy into that. And some people we find on our streets today are people who shouldn't really be out there like that. And we should be sort of, thinking in that context of providing justice for those folks and making sure that we highlight these ideas and recommendations that come from us who have lived it. And it, in my view, it would behoove not only just service providers to sort of like listen to their constituents on this piece, but also government should be. I kind of wanted to sort of explore that a little bit, because we here. There was a question about, I believe it was street medicine, and then I'm not sure what exactly does that mean and what entails that, but I believe Couper could speak to this. So could you kind of describe what street medicine is and how does it work in your community, and if it is something other communities should adopt?
Your work as a street medic, Couper.
Yeah. It's funny because like there's not. I was kind of the only one, doing anything. I saw a need, and there are some folks that do help out, but like I'm out here, on the daily, the nightly. Some days I don't sleep. I saw a need for. I was in the shelter system, and I saw a lot of the women not getting any kind of health care, any kind of the suffering and pains and this and that. They're just kind of ignored and pushed to the side. So I started helping people, and the word got out, and one thing led to another, and I'm going, halfway across the city. Something like myself, I do it out of my own. I mean, I pay for this stuff out of my own pocket, the little bit that I have. But like, it's important because most folks don't trust the hospitals. They don't want to go to the hospital because you get the sheriffs live there, and so they don't want to get, if you go in with some sort of an ailment, or you got stabbed, or your baby mama shot you or something. They want to know why you got that, and what's going on. If you have warrants, you're going to jail. So one, that causes a lot of mistrust, and people would rather die than feel like looked down upon. Because there's the staff looks, oh, you're homeless, or what, all that those fucked up feelings that people give to us. It makes a lack of trust. So one thing that I've gained here is trust. People will come get me all the time, all throughout the night, because they trust and they believe in me. And that's something that our healthcare system doesn't have with the unhoused out here. And so I'm busy as heck, and I'm constantly trying to give the best healthcare and try to give what I can, but reasonably. I mean, I've pulled bullets out of people. I've sewed up, everything. I've seen all. And I know other cities do have similar things, but I'm just doing this. This is just me, and I ride my BMX back and forth. Just when people need something, I'm there, because otherwise they'll just suffer, and they'll just, a lot of people would have, died because they don't want to ask for help. And so when we ask for help, it's important, and it's very rare that we ask for help out here, so I'm glad that I'm here to do that for people. It's a lot, but I can handle it. I'm a disabled firefighter, so I was here on the job, so I use those skills to do what I can out here. And I'm glad that people ask for me, So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's just a little bit about what I do out here.
Yeah, that was great, Couper.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe that is a great solution. And there are many great innovative solutions that should lead people into a more stable housing model or program, or however. Those things should lead people to a place to live. And in looking at places to live, traditionally, one thing that I personally have always thought was a viable solution to homelessness was public housing. And I believe that it was created in efforts to try to end homelessness among poor communities. But it has historically suffered from stigmatization and stereotypes, to the point where in a lot of communities, public housing has been demonized to an extent and looked at as unfavorable. So I wanted to kind of connect this piece to Ms. Vicky, because we see in the District of Columbia a slow and steady and constant privatization of public housing, which in a way stagnates our level of homelessness in our community. Could you speak to the benefits of residing in public housing? Speak to any of the challenges there, and how do you see public housing in addressing housing instability in our country?
First of all, I'm not going to say public housing is perfect. I'm not going to say it's going to work for everyone. It has worked for me. Being on a true sliding scale with your rent. Believe it or not, I pay $25 a month for rent, and that includes electric, water, everything. There are problems here. There's a lot of alcoholics. There are a lot of addicts here, but it's not the old stigma of gangs hanging out in hallways and stuff like that. The whole government housing needs to get a facelift, in the public eye, because when someone would say public housing to me, I'm thinking, okay, I go out early in the morning to catch a bus to go to work and I'm going to get raped. That's not true. You know, the crime is lower in the public housing areas than anywhere else. So I think it needs a complete facelift, and I think it needs a complete overhaul publicly, because it's not what it was in the 60s. It's not what it was in the 70s. And it's not an all Black community. It's not all white. It's not all brown. We're a rainbow here, and we love it. We love interacting with each other and learning about each other. It works for me. It works for me. And let's face it, if you can't afford where you live, you're going to keep becoming homeless and keep becoming homeless. It's going to be a chronic situation for you. But once you find housing that you can afford, it's great. It works. And I would like to make a prediction that I don't think I'll ever be on the streets again, except to help others.
Yes, and I think that is something that is essential to our conversation. We are in a lot of ways unique, because we are moved to do something about the ills in our community that we see, and our common thread is that throughout our sort of lives, we have experienced something that not a lot of people have sort of like the strength to endure, and they wouldn't be as active as we are. And I feel that we are in a lot of ways the examples in our community we want to try to highlight, and we want to try to tell not just the general public but also our peers that being active, even if you're in the situation, is the way to kind of start the ball rolling on how we can try to produce the cure to these ills on our own. And it is so important when we're talking about trying to produce better sort of like policy in housing, and when we're talking about how to better treat our neighbors, it's essential that we talk about the stories from our perspective. And I think that the Right to a Home project we have engaged in that has brought us together here today is just one example of how we can collaboratively work across our community to better first start telling the story and having a better narrative from people who have not only have the experience, but are in the work. And it gives a different perspective to your reader or content consumer. I was able to, through my particular piece, reach a broader audience. And it also highlights the value of consumer engagement. I think these were things that people sort of talk about in silence. Opportunity to kind of put that on the table, you know, and start the conversation about how do you value your constituents and give.
Like Reggie may have froze there for a minute until he comes
And
back.
who are
You know, we have 5 more.
motivated
There he
and
is.
passionate enough to be out there and to be doing something for our people, you know, and
We have 5 more minutes in the panel before we close. Just want to get everyone's thoughts. How can we support your work? You know, from each of you. We'll start with Marcus, and then we'll go to Couper, and then Vicky, and then last Reggie. But Marcus, how can we support your work? How can other people support your work?
A whole new audience based on how we are able to engage in a more collaborative space to start talking about how we as a body could start producing some sort.
Okay, guys. So I'm gonna try my best to answer this because I'm not coming in clear here. So I think I heard folks say, "How can we best support your work?" And as a collective, you know. So as a body,
like stake in this game, and we want to try to make sure people who are insecurely housed are at the forefront of, you know, the conversation. And I think this is just one way to start.
I think what we need to do, we need to start off fundraising for each other nationally, because locally, governmentally, we are not. They forgot about the needs of the people. They really forgot. They you know, this is a don't get it twisted. This is a class thing involved. That's part of this ingredients too. Rich and poor, the haves and have not. And so we need to get with each other, you know, the best way we can on Zoom, and find out what each other is doing in different cities. This is the start. And like I said before, we need to you know, campaign and fundraise for each other right now, because here in New York City, we are now starting to take, the communities are slowly starting to take things into their hands. So Couper and the other young lady, you know, I like what they're saying. We are not really focusing too much on these agencies. We are coming together as a collective here in the city with grassroots organization and trying to house and casework our own people, because we know that the city is they really don't have the interest of the people. The only interest is those who are in power, those who are comfortable. And so to wrap up, what I'm trying to say is that we really need to become our own investors and have some form of stake in our new world that we are trying to build. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's good.
Couper.
One of the things that we need to use what's in our environment, you know, and that's each other. We need to help each other. Like one of the things I'm involved with is stolenbelonging.org, where we went around and we documented unhoused folks' stories about their stuff being taken by DBW and the cops. Well, from that, a lot was learned, but we needed, I was able to get a GoFundMe. One of the nurses made a GoFundMe for me. Well, that's how I got my medical supplies. That's how I got things that people needed. So when I heard these stories, we're documenting these stories. It's myself and the other people that I'm involved with that we're the one telling these stories, and we're the one showing that to the city leaders and saying, hey, this is what your employees are doing to these people, and they're taking their tents, all that stuff. Like every little bit, any dollars that I get, I spend, out on the street for what people need. We need to be able to help each other, but also when we had a class action lawsuit here in the city, it was myself riding on my bike that was going around and giving out the paperwork to all the unhoused. The city wasn't doing shit. You know what I mean? So it's like we have to help each other, be there for each other, and give information and knowledge to each other, because that's the only way we're gonna, half the people didn't even know what a class action lawsuit was, or even when the corona came out, the COVID, they didn't even know there was a virus happening. Myself, I was out here spreading the news. The cities aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so therefore we are taking it upon ourselves to do what's right, to do what the things that we need to do, because we're all each other has, and use what's in your environment, and so that's what I do. And I try to help wherever I can. I volunteer with the Coalition of Homelessness. I have the GoFundMe, and also a documentary was made called Couper Was Here. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but check it out. But that is our voices being heard. And that's what we're lacking here in a lot of the cities, is our voices are not being heard and they're not being paid attention to. It's like, you're just the homeless. No, we're human beings, we're people, we're real. We have blood just like you, so we're being treated. I want the treatment of us to be better than it is, and for us to have a fair shake and equal playing ground. Start us off equal and make it fair, and then see where people go, instead of just bringing it, from below. And then it's hard to even get up and climb up out of wherever we're at, so make things fair and help each other. That's all there is to it, and just be there and listen to each other and make shit matter, basically, for each other. If that's okay. Did I answer the question good?
Yeah, thank you, Couper. That was great. Vicky, how can we support your work?
Buy paper. We have digital copies. We have subscriptions. Buy your local street paper. Listen to what they're saying. And another good tool that I know Couper knows about, because I've seen her on it, is Invisible People. They have a YouTube channel. And if you're too shy to go up to a homeless person and talk to them, start with the YouTube channel on Invisible People. It has so many stories of every situation of homelessness that there can be. And that's a really good educational tool. And then take those ideas and talk to your congressman, your city leaders. But I've always been a firm believer that the people who are going to fix homelessness are the homeless.
Yeah. Yep.
That's right. Thank you, Vicky.
You're welcome.
You're in homelessness. You're in homelessness with a home. You know what I mean? So that's like the best way to, yeah.
Yeah.
Reggie, we'll close with you.
As Joe said that. What's that?
Sorry, I believe that people who have our experience, people who have been there and have done that, are the ones who are instrumental in producing the end of this social issue. I want to thank Miss Vicky Batcher, Miss and Marcus Moore. Please stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen, because we're going to go and explore more about this issue in our next hour. So stay tuned, stay engaged, and please, whenever you see people in your community want to have, do your best to inspire them to get involved, and be at the forefront of it.
Thank you. Thank you, Reggie. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Vicky. And thank you, Couper. We're going to take about 15-minute break, and we'll be back at 3:30 at the next panel.
Thank you.
See y'all soon.
You guys are the shit. You guys are the shit.
So are you. Thank you. editor-in-chief of Street Spirit in Berkeley, is going to be the moderator for this panel. We're going to be talking about solutions. Alastair, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to get this panel started and get a chance to talk to 4 really amazing activists and organizers around the country. Today we have Nita B. from The Village in Oakland, Selena Trowell from Vocal NY in New York, Kyle Arbuckle from National Low Income Housing Coalition in DC, and Zachary Johnson from Call to Action in Minnesota. I want to start off just by acknowledging how excited I was watching the whole first panel, and also just acknowledging kind of this question of like tech and accessibility for a panel like this. We've had some slight technical difficulties, but I just think it's important to remember that a lot of the folks who should be part of this conversation in an ongoing basis are really struggling to continue to be in this conversation right now because we've moved all of these conversations onto the internet, which just isn't easy to access all the time for folks who live on the street. So I just say that because I really appreciate the fact that we've been able to make this work today. And I think it's really special that we're organizing people who have all different levels of experience. So on that note, this panel is going to focus on solutions. We left the last panel on this concept that unhoused people are the experts on homelessness, and that these are the folks who are going to kind of move us forward as we try to remember what kind of the most pertinent solutions are. So I want to just give everyone here some time to introduce themselves. We often hear policymakers talking about kind of the solution to homelessness as this big monolith, but in truth, we know that it's lots of incremental change, lots of small solutions that really need to happen before we can truly start to talk about the end to homelessness. And so I just want everyone here to go around and spend like 5 minutes introducing yourself and your work and explaining how you envision the solutions to homelessness. What do you think needs to happen in the short term as well as in the long term to make significant change? And remember that we're here from all over the country, so even just explaining like the bare bones of the work that you do will be really interesting for us to all hear. So why don't we start on the West Coast with Nita B. in Oakland. I don't think we can quite hear Nita. Maybe let's hop over to Selena while we kind of work out Nita's mic.
All right, mic check. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, all right, no problem. Awesome. So peace, everybody. My name is Selena Trowell. I am the Homelessness Union organizer with Vocal New York. And so I'm really happy to be here today. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm also happy to see my comrades from the East Coast, Marcus Moore from Fish the Homeless in the building. And he gave a bit of a backdrop on what it looks like to battle the homelessness crisis here in New York City. And so part of the work that we do at Vocal New York, we organize low-income communities and folks that are directly impacted by not just homelessness, but AIDS, HIV, mass incarceration, and the war on drugs, right? One of the things is we understand the complexities of all those things and how they are interconnected, right? And so in terms of building a base around homelessness, the idea and the approach is to use grassroots organizing, base building, and political education to have those individuals who are directly impacted by the oppression and history of structural racism as it plays into homelessness to build political power, right? To acknowledge, to understand their power, and to be able to push for the things that they deserve. And that's housing, right? That's housing being a human right. That's fair and just, equitable, safe housing. Those are the things that our comrades and our brothers, sisters, and siblings need. In terms of some of the things that we are working on, currently we have those issue areas out in New York City, but we also have chapters in upstate New York. So Vocal New York and its homelessness work reaches far and wide throughout the state. And so we are also a part of coalitions here in the city. And then we are also a part of statewide coalitions that encompass upstate and downstate. That's our Housing Justice for All work that we do and that we're included in. And a lot of those things is making sure that we find proper solutions, not just for the city, but also in understanding that, and I think this is an organizing within itself, right? Is that you must organize and you must bring into the space the most marginalized of people in order to find liberation for all. And so in understanding that our upstate brothers and sisters may not have the very same protections around housing and homelessness and access to proper housing, we want to ensure that we're able to then push for laws. We want to make sure that we are fighting for laws, that we are holding elected leadership accountable to be able to reflect the housing rights that we need, so that way it not necessarily looks the same across the board, but so that there is some sort of equity that is happening across between upstate and downstate housing and needs. So that's all I'll share for now.
That's awesome. Thank you, Selena. Okay, let's move to Kyle Arbuckle in DC. Just spend, 5-ish minutes introducing yourself and talking about kind of your vision of short and long-term solutions to homelessness.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Alastair. So my name is Kyle Arbuckle, and I am a housing advocacy organizer at the National Low Income Housing Coalition. The National Low Income Housing Coalition is a nonpartisan policy and research nonprofit dedicated to ending housing poverty and homelessness. And while our mission is to increase housing affordability for all across the nation, we focus our efforts on extremely low income renters, so those that make 30% of area and median income, because as we find in our research, extremely low income, otherwise known as ELI renters, face the greatest shortage of affordable and available housing. One of our big research reports is the GAP report, and that talks about the shortage that ELI renters face. And our most recent data found that there are only 36 affordable and available homes for every 100 extremely low income renter households. And so as you go up each income bracket, that number increases, demonstrating that there is more affordability and availability for higher income brackets versus the extremely low income bracket. That may seem obvious, but what we found is that the need is the greatest there. I think that's the biggest thing, is that it's not just that they can't afford the housing, is that they simply cannot find it because it's not available, because higher income brackets have dipped down into those lower income rental units. We also have another report called the Out of Reach report, which talks about how wages have not kept up with the cost of housing. And we found that 71% of renters pay over half their income on housing. And so I think a lot of what we're working on right now is obviously responding to the pandemic. We've seen, huge increases in job loss, which means people can't pay their rent, which means they face eviction, which means they face homelessness. We're working right now to urge Congress to pass more rental assistance and rent relief, a uniform eviction moratorium, and then also more funding for homeless service providers so they can adequately socially distance people in their networks and in their shelters, and do better outreach to people. So I think short term, like I just said, we're focusing on responding to the pandemic, but long term, our goal is to end homelessness and housing poverty. And we believe that is through increased federal funding for housing subsidy programs. So whether that be public housing, the voucher program, home program, 202, things like that. My role as an organizer is I work with our state partners. So I help coordinate our advocacy efforts at the state level and also at the federal level. And I think, you know, this pandemic has shown, it appears unprecedented, and it is, but a lot of these problems existed well before this pandemic. And the government has shown that they have the capacity to address, you know, job loss and homelessness in certain ways, and they should definitely continue to do so. And so that's what our goal is at NLIHC, is to continue to push the federal government to intervene in homelessness and housing poverty. So I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Kyle. And Zach, over to you in DC.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, cool, thanks. So I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
I'm so sorry. In Minneapolis.
No problem. Midwest. We're here. So I'm here. I work in the official shelter system, which in Minneapolis includes 6 church shelters or church-based shelters. So that's sort of the entry into this. I live in a community that does sort of unofficial hospitality through a network of people who have homes. And then I'm an organizer with the people who don't fit inside any of the systems of shelter. Most recently, that would be in the uprisings in Minneapolis. There are, I don't know, 1,000 people who are outside of the shelter system, those 6 shelters. And they were in the path of, you know, the police and National Guard who were marching through the streets. So that's sort of like the context of homelessness in Minneapolis right now is really shaped by the uprisings. And like most recently, what's been happening in Minneapolis is a group of organizers occupied a hotel, an old Sheraton hotel that had been evacuated because of COVID mostly, and then definitely because of the uprisings. And people moved into the hotel, I don't know, 150 people within 24 hours. And then within a week, there were 400 people in the hotel with another 400 people on the wait list. And it was all just volunteer run outside any sanction. There was no organization or anything. It was just people. Or there was no like official entity. There was a lot of organization that it took to put that together. And the official like systems, governments, nonprofits, and everything totally shunned that effort. So it lasted for about 2.5 weeks, and then everybody moved from the hotel into parks, or most people did, to city parks. And that's currently where a lot of people are. So my work right now is mostly around organizing people who are living in encampments right now. The official system of 6 shelters houses maybe like 1,000 people, and there's probably at least 1,000 people in parks and camps. That doesn't say anything about the people who are living in hospitals and jails who don't have any place to live, or couch hopping. So we're trying to do some organizing work locally around a lot of the unsheltered folks in Minneapolis. We're behind a lot of what I'm hearing from other cities. There is no like, at least that I know of, that I've been a part of, no like grassroots housing organizing, at least not sustained. So so we're trying to like build that right now. So I think like the short-term solutions that are to seize more hotels, because most hotels around Minneapolis anyway are sitting empty. So one way or another, we're going to try to move people back into hotels before the winter comes. So the 1,000 people who are camping right now try to figure out a way to get hotels. I think the first panel brought up another short-term solution, which is to sort of shift the narrative away from services and more towards just like housing directly. I think there's a lot of problems and emphasis put on services, and we can talk more about that later. And it feels like a way to distract people from the actual solution of just like housing, which needs to look a lot of different ways. But we focus on like providing services without housing. That's not really a solution. The long-term solution we're thinking about locally here is a huge investment in public housing, I think. That also came up in the first panel. So I think I'm echoing some of that. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, Nita, let's see how we do with your audio now. Introduce yourself, the work you do with the village, and then what you view as sort of short-term as well as long-term solutions.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yay.
Awesome.
Yay. All right. Happy to be here with y'all. I've been really enjoying hearing the conversations, whatnot. My name is Nita B. I'm with a group called The Village here in Oakland, California. We're a movement, a grassroots movement of unhoused leaders, formerly unhoused leaders, housing insecure folks with housed allies. We assert that housing is a human right and that homelessness is not a crime, and we engage in taking over empty public lands and building tiny home villages with support services for unhoused folks. We also upgrade the quality of life in the encampments, everything from repairing tents to getting better tents, putting in porta potties, hand washing stations, plumbing, solar, electricity, building pantries and kitchens, getting generators in the communities. We do direct services and support. We feed, provide 750 hot meals per day. Per week. 240 grocery bags per week. About 300 COVID sanitation kits per week, plus bath and body kits. We do policy advocacy. We also engage in squatting and adverse possession. I think during COVID, we've been focusing, our work actually tripled during COVID. With the shelter in place, what we saw was that we already had like a mutual aid culture and system here in Oakland, where house folks really were taking care of unhoused neighbors because the city wasn't doing nothing. And with the shelter in place, that stopped. And so like the first 3 weeks of the shelter in place, we had a massive food shortage and water shortage in the curbside communities, not just because house folks and churches would not stop coming to bring food, but because of the rationing happening in the stores, people couldn't get the water they needed, for, the week's worth of water, whatnot. With restaurants shut down, people didn't have access to food as well. So yeah, our direct services have like tripled in number and in efforts. We started a hotel program here with our sister organizations, the East Oakland Collective and Love and Justice in the Streets. And our governor, Gavin Newsom here, gave the mayors of California the power to commandeer hotels. And some mayors in some cities, took that opportunity to commandeer hotels and move, hundreds of thousands of people into hotels. The mayor here in Oakland actually refused to. And so we started a program that's been completely run off of a GoFundMe. We've raised about $150,000 to be able to house 42 families, 42 households in between 2 hotels. And we're now in the point, we've been holding that down since April 24th, and we're about to actually increase the numbers of people that we have because of finally getting some support from the county government. When we started this program, they were lightweight ridiculing us, telling us we weren't professionals, we had no business doing this. And 3 months into the process, they were calling us up being, how do we do this? So we're glad that they finally do recognize that homeless people actually know the best answers and approaches to how to treat other homeless people with dignity and respect. We also are continuing to have lawsuits. We started a trend here in Oakland for unhoused curbside communities to start suing the Oakland government for the violation of our First Amendment rights, our Fourth Amendment rights, our Eighth Amendment rights, and our 14th Amendment rights. So that's continuing to go strong and be active. In terms of solutions, I think before we all know that housing and permanent housing and deeply affordable housing in this age of gentrification, which is, destroying all of our communities, all of our urban communities, is the solution. But I think in order to get there, what we really need to talk about is a paradigm shift. We need an immediate change in how we look at homeless folks. What I've seen is, first of all, most of the people implementing and coming up with the ideas have never been homeless, don't engage with homeless folks on a regular basis. And they also have a very deep anti-homeless bias. There is a lot of discrimination within bureaucracies that are supposed to be addressing homelessness, and with even some of the nonprofits that are supposed to be serving homeless people. There's a deep, deep anti-homeless bias. There's a deep anti-poverty bias. And there's a deep anti-Black bias. And here in Oakland, 80% of the folks who are homeless are unhoused. And before gentrification, 80% of the folks who were housed were African Americans. So there's literally a total trip in numbers. But we need to have a decriminalization of homelessness, as well as just the deep anti-homeless bias. And we also need to stop thinking of people who do not have enough or who cannot be players in this economic system for whatever reason, who are unhireable for whatever reason, who as disposable. As long as we continue to believe that human beings can be disposable, we're going to have issues like homelessness and the lack of solutions for homelessness. We also need to have to stop profit-driven development. Here in Oakland, we've been dealing with gentrification for 20 years now, and homelessness is the fruit of that development agenda. And we just need to end gentrification, and we need to start looking at other forms of development that are not grounded in the displacement of the existing population or the displacement of people who are traditionally marginalized or oppressed or exploited or left out of this society. And I think until we have those shifts in a collective consciousness, and a shift in these policymakers, and a shift in the people who hold the resources and the power, then we're not going to ever get to a real, solution, which is housing. As long as we are disposable, as long as we are, not whatever the biases are, as long as those biases exist, we are never going to have the political will from the people in power to actually serve our needs and serve the most vulnerable.
That's right.
So yeah, short term. Yeah.
Awesome.
So I'll cut it there.
Yeah. Well, I do want to keep talking about some of those points you just brought up about bias and criminalization, which kind of go hand in hand, right? Like we have this anti-homeless bias, which leads to mass criminalization of unhoused people and sheltered people living in encampments and curbside communities. And we also, I heard from a few of you about how kind of the pandemic and also the recent wave of uprisings have kind of like changed the conversations we're having about how to move forward towards solutions. And Selena, I know that you and Vocal NY have been involved with a lot of actions related to kind of defunding the police, which we've just heard a lot about in the last couple of months. But I'm wondering if you can speak specifically to how this idea of defunding the police is connected to kind of building affordable housing, investing in poor communities, and ending homelessness, sort of ending that criminalization against people who are unsheltered.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. So in terms of defunding the police, I think for many people that, they may have just become newly activated to that, but I just want to shed light on the fact that the idea of defunding the police has been something that has been led by Black and brown folks across the nation for a very long time, specifically the families of those that have been victims of state-sanctioned violence or executions. I think what we're seeing now, though, is that the pressure has bust that pipe, and there's a global uprising as to what it means to defund the NYPD and finally, and not just the NYPD, but all police departments, and properly and rightfully invest in communities. When we say invest in our communities, we mean all the things that were taken from us, right? That would strip away one's dignity, that would strip away one's agency and authority, that would strip away one's idea to believe that they deserve police to keep them safe, right? One of the things that we have seen is that housing, healthcare, education, drug user health, all those things for purposeful term of the word have been strangled out of communities. And therefore police then occupy within these spaces as a way for us to then believe or internalize that this is what we deserve, right? And we know that that comes from a space of racial capitalism, right? There's a long history of racial capitalism and what that means, and you know, like what my comrade said there in terms of like how it becomes the fruit of that is homelessness. You know, whether that had been from the GI Bill, right, gerrymandering to mass incarceration to redlining, here we are with this issue of homelessness. So to bring it back full circle to defunding the police, local New York, we had let a call for folks to gather, to organize, and come out to City Hall and to demand that there be at least $1 billion defunded from the NYPD and invested into our communities, rightfully so. And what we saw, what we already knew, right? And I think towards the end, I'll speed it up and just say this, you know, in terms of encampments, right? And especially in the midst of this global pandemic of COVID-19, we know that medical officials have said that it's, you know, not the smartest thing to do to break up encampments, right? We understand that it'll allow for the spread of COVID-19 and also strip community members away from needed resources. A lot of our comrades that were with us during that time of the encampment down at City Hall were homeless. A lot of them already called those benches in those parks their home. And they were a direct representation of the failure of the city and state and elected officials. And there was a transition among the media. There was a transition, I guess, due to pressures that may be, that after a while, when those that were privileged enough to leave that space and return to their homes, and our comrades chose to stay because they had nowhere else to go, and they continued on to have to show a direct resistance with their bodies and presence there and say that you continue to fail us, and that's why we have nowhere to go and why we're here. There became this shift in media about it becoming a protest thing to a homeless encampment. And then all of a sudden it was pegged as this negative connotation. But what we failed to realize is that those protesters were there as a representation of everything the state has failed to do in terms of housing. And so while they may have been homeless, that within itself was an act of protest and active resistance. And so, you know, and unfortunately, right after it got pegged this way, you know, in came the raids, the brutality that, and they assumed that they could just power wash away the legacy and the seeds that were planted there at Occupy City Hall, which then became Abolition Park. But you know, to your point, there is a direct correlation to being able to deconstruct the ills of capitalism and the bodyguards or the guardians that they choose to use in order to inflict or in order to protect what that state is, and that's the police force. And so what we find is that if you can take that money that our communities rightfully have deserved, and it has been stolen from us through mass incarceration, it has been stolen from us through the war on drugs, it has been stolen from us through redlining and through Black and brown families being unable to get a home after they've served the country, right? It was written into bills that they weren't able to do this. And you take that money and put it back into communities. We can invest in things like public housing, social housing. We can invest in things like supported housing. We can invest in things like new home construction. We can invest in the fact that right now we've had to, like Marcus said, we in our communities had to do what we had to do as New Yorkers. And we are doing a GoFundMe campaign to pay for hotel rooms for a homeless individual so that those who do not want to be out in the street and be safe from COVID-19 can do so. Right. But these police departments have the budgets to do that. And we know that they've never kept us safe. Right. They either come after the tragedy has happened, or they have caused the tragedy to happen. So it's something that we have to begin to take a deeper look at, and why we feel like we may not deserve more, but that all we need, or that we deserve to be policed, but not housed.
Yeah, for sure. That's great. Thank you. Yeah, I think this idea that, you know, it's so overwhelming to think about how much money it will cost to like permanently house all the people who are living on the street. And we know, like you just said, that money is available, and it's just being kind of misallocated. But I also want to talk about more direct and affordable methods of housing people, kind of like rapid grassroots rehousing of folks who are living on the street in really vulnerable conditions. Zach and Nita both are involved with these projects that seek to kind of radically redistribute space and housing. And so I just want to hear each of you talk a little bit about that, maybe starting with Zach with the kind of reclamation of that Sheraton hotel. I just want to know from both of you, what role do you think that kind of autonomous housing or the reclamation of property plays into the solution of homelessness, and kind of where does that sit on this imagined trajectory of like temporary housing versus permanent housing? We'll start with Zach and then go to Nita.
Okay. Well, I'm interested to hear Nita's. It sounds like there's a similar project going there, but with a different relationship to the state, which is an interesting. I'm curious to hear about that. Locally here, I mean, I don't think those two things are separate. The like reclamation of space, the repatriation of privatized land, is not separate from the longer term vision of more supported housing. I think one has to, I think that the first, if it's the way we're imagining it here at least, is we will force one to lead to the other. We'll force the state to come to the aid of, or to make a choice at least, of people who seize hotels, people who seize properties. I think to the question about the police is really relevant here as well. I think like locally, the only to scale response that the state gave to sheltered or unsheltered people is with the police right now. There's tiny teams of case managers who get assigned, here and there in different parks or whatever, like 4 case managers for a park full of 400 people, something like that. And then there's that media spin of like, we're doing our best to support people. Things obviously deteriorate because they're underfunded, undersupported, and then the rationale for the police response is like created that way. And that's been happening a lot here. So I think this idea of taking space, sanctioned or not, partly is about broadening the narrative. Like we're not actually operating in scarcity. We're operating like under the boot of private property, privatized hotels. I think in normal times they operate regularly at like 60% capacity or something like that. So it's all there all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're trying to do is say this property should be used for people who need it. And I think the folks who are living in tents right now in camps, it's like an annual thing in Minneapolis, in Minnesota. We think about what's coming in winter. This like cycle happens, and the state has figured out which nonprofits they can twist arms and pressure to open up space in there, like put mats on the ground. That's been the pattern the last 5 years, I would say, 10 years maybe. This year, we're trying to say we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to take the space. because it's there.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of broadening the narrative for people to see that there is space that's not scarce. We'll just take it if we need it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Nita, can you talk about how that applies to the work that you do with the village, building kind of guerrilla housing out on the streets in Oakland?
Yeah, I'd say that there is a very fine line, if there is even a line at all, between direct action and survival for homeless folks. Homeless folks already are going to be taking up, unhoused folks are going to be taking up land to survive, to exist, to be. And it becomes a direct action when we do it unified and we do it with a public message. And when we do that, then all of a sudden we become a threat. Then all of a sudden, you know, we have encampments here in Oakland that have been around for decades, and they're growing and they're multiplying. But they're happening, you know, in a very organic fashion, and they don't have a political call attached to them. But when the village tries to do this, we get an eviction notice in a week. I also want to state, you know, according to the Alameda County Point in Time, which is a homeless residential count they do every 2 years in the middle of winter at like 3 o'clock in the morning. There are 4,000 people, according to that account, who are unhoused in Oakland. From being in the streets every day and doing work across all of Oakland, the village believes there's at least 12,000 people who are homeless. I want people to understand that there are currently enough empty private residential units in the city of Oakland today to actually house those 4,000 folks today. Again, there's a lack of public will. There should not be. It's a crime that there are empty residential homes just sitting there empty. I also want to say that there is enough empty public land to actually create what we call tiny home villages, whether that's tiny homes on wheels or tiny homes on foundations, which is what the village became, you know, known for, developing homes based on what is legal to have on a trailer and what is legal to have as what they call an auxiliary dwelling unit, which is a cottage, a grandpa cottage that people tend to have in their backyards. There is enough land that is owned by the city of Oakland to actually create numerous tiny home villages that would get people indoors with a lock, with a key, with ventilation, away from the elements, not susceptible to being robbed all the time, not susceptible to being raped all the time, with kitchens, with services, wraparound services that people need. There's just, again, a lack of political will. And I think part of it deals with the fact is that our mayor and her administration are petty. They are really petty. They don't like to be pointed out of their mistakes. They don't like to be upshown by especially housed people or unhoused people that we can actually come up with a solution overnight, and that they can't even, you know, figure out what to do for, 20 years now. I think there's also this total need for this bureaucracy to control everything and to control the solutions. And the system is also designed to be very, very slow. So while, what we need is, we are in an emergency. We are in an emergency of a state of emergency of homelessness, and we're in a state of emergency of COVID. Now more than ever, like, we knew this was a public health issue before COVID hit, and now COVID has made it very clear that housing is actually a public health intervention. Not only is it a human right, but it is actually a health intervention to keep a spread of a pandemic. But because the bureaucracy is so slow and designed that way, you get this great idea, like, let's put everyone in the 150,000 hotels that are empty across California. That was a call that was put out in March, and it is July.
Right. Yeah, right. So,
because everything just is so slow. And I think one thing that we have going on here in Oakland that is really exciting is that this movement to create land trusts and to create real estate cooperatives. The village is part of that movement. We're pooling our members, as well as the village as an organization. We're pooling our resources together and working with other private and nonprofit and grassroots and individual members of our community to throw all our money in a pool and start buying the houses that are left, because our government has absolutely no political will to do so.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to learn from organizations like yours who've just been doing this work since long before the pandemic. And we have a couple of minutes left. I want to ask Kyle the final question, but after this, we're going to move into breakout rooms and we'll have the chance to kind of keep discussing these topics because I know there's a lot to say. But Kyle, just to finish us off in our last 3 minutes, I know that you and NLICH do a lot of work like organizing low-income renters to have a political voice, and we've been talking here about you know, like really spotlighting the solutions that are grown in the community, the homeless community. So I just wondered if you could finish us off by telling us about like why it's important to build political power amongst low-income renters, and what you found in your work doing that.
Yeah, so it's very important. As everyone else has mentioned, I think those are great examples of the ways that people experiencing homelessness and low-income renters are, you know, taking agency over their lives. But at NLIC, you know, we focus on national politics mostly. So we've seen that in 2016, under half of renters voted in the election versus 70%. And I think that's just a matter of, you know, it's logistics to voting, right? Not necessarily putting the onus on low-income renters, but we try to, you know, mobilize, educate, and get our state partners to register as many low-income renters in their network, just to get them thinking more about the electoral, like national politics, because obviously, as I mentioned, we focus on federal funding, and if the federal government is seeing that more low-income renters are voting, then they'll have to respond to that constituency of renters. Something I do for NLIC is we have these bi-weekly calls called Tenant Talk Live, where we'll have a guest speaker come and speak about various issues. We've had folks from HUD come and talk about certain programs and different issues affecting low-income renters during the pandemic. We've had, you know, some artists from around the country, activists, lawyers, anyone who can speak to low-income renter issues specifically. So yeah, that's a big part of our work, is incorporating that perspective, obviously.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, everybody. We have time for just one more closing thought, like 30 seconds from everyone about how we can support the homeless community. Like, you're all working directly with folks. How can we as viewers support our unhoused brothers and sisters? Starting maybe with Nita.
Can you repeat that question again? I'm having a hard time hearing.
Yeah. How can we as viewers support our unhoused neighbors? Just quick 30 seconds on how people in cities all over the country can support their homeless neighbors.
Get to know your homeless neighbor. Go and visit them. Bring some coffee and bring some case of water and get to know their names. Be a good neighbor, just like you would to your house neighbors. Get to know their names. Find out what they're going through. You'd be surprised. Your unhoused neighbor might actually have a skill set or some wisdom that you might need to know as a house person. Yeah, just be a good neighbor.
Awesome. Selena, what do you think?
I would say we need to begin to abolish the NIMBY landlords in our mind. And by NIMBY, I mean the not in my backyard folks, right? I think we have to have this understanding that the otherism further divides and weaponizes how we are able to show up and take care of one another. So the moment you realize that that person is a human and so are you, and you deserve the same dignity and respect, you begin to protect that individual the same way you protect yourself and your loved ones, because they are your loved ones. We are each other's mirror, and we have to begin to humanize that and have a radical, like Nita B said, have a radical paradigm shift and transformation in our social relationships with one another. That's how we can support our homeless siblings.
Zach, what do you think?
I think now is a time where class interests are aligned, and so I think like getting like educated. I think probably Nita said where I would say like get to know the people, but also the class interest of unhoused folks as a class, and then put your class privilege, if you are a housed person, in service of that vision. Because right now they're like pretty aligned, so it's easier for a lot of people. At least my experience is that it's easier for a lot of people who are just starting to think about homelessness to identify with solutions that homeless folks themselves, unsheltered people themselves, are talking about, like housing, like public housing, that sort of thing.
For sure. And Kyle, we'll end with you.
I think Zach made kind of the point that I wanted to make, is that, and the question you asked me is that low-income renters are a, political block. Like they have, like we talk about, workers and certain classes of people, but we should view renters as that type of, group that has political power and that should build political power to get what they deserve, which is the dignity of the homeless person.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. Everyone, make sure to follow all these folks. They're doing unbelievable work, and I'm very grateful to each of them. And make sure everyone to join our breakout sessions, which will come up next, so that we can keep on talking about this stuff. Thanks so much.
joining us today. Really appreciate him coming to speak today. He is the rapporteur on adequate housing at the UN as a component of the right to adequate standard of living and on the right to non-discrimination in this context. He took up his mandate in May of this year. He's a professor of law and development at the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT. And he's the founder of the Displacement Research and Action Network at MIT also. He's done over 20 years of research on social movements and human rights advocacy around the world, focusing in particular on land and property rights, evictions, and displacement. And he has published numerous books and scholarly articles, including research on evictions, displacement, human rights, and housing. He's going to talk to us today for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll go off and we'll talk a little bit more about what we did in our breakout session. So thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you, Amanda. And thank you, Chaumtoli, and to the Law at the Margins, and to the various community and grassroots media organizations and the housing rights advocates and organizers here. Housing as a human right, of course, is a difficult topic to discuss in the United States. From purely an international level, the United States, in terms of its foreign policy, has never accepted housing as a human right and has refused to sign international treaties that guarantee housing as a human right for its own citizens. It has a long history of rejecting all economic, social, and cultural rights, precisely the rights that matter for the poor and the marginalized. Housing, of course, is a central part of them. I would say that that's actually the central challenge in front of the organizers. In a country, given its past and its history and its culture of the rejection of the rights that belong to the most marginalized as being equally important, how do you actually convince the rest of the country to go along with recognizing the importance of something like housing as a human right? Precisely the same challenge that was faced by those who have tried to push for healthcare as a human right. Every time an argument was made in the last 15 years, we have heard louder and louder in this country that, you know, healthcare is not a commodity, it's a human right. We have heard it over and over again. It's been accepted by a vast number of people. So country is changing, but it is also still controversial and rejected by a lot of other people. And if healthcare is at that level, housing is not that far behind. Even fewer people accept housing as a human right at this point, despite the heroic advocacy of groups like yours and many others who have been advocating for housing as a human right for decades. But they've always been, as the title of your group says, they've been at the margins. But they are very important voices at the margins. And these are the voices that push for real change in the United States. And I think that that's actually a central dilemma, that the rejection of something like housing as a human right comes from a misunderstanding of US exceptionalism and US supremacy, which is a root cause of the racism and white supremacy that led to the death of George Floyd and so many people of color. So it involves the rejection of both, essentially. And the importance of mobilization and movements for pushing housing as a human right cannot be overstated in this context. Housing will emerge and is emerging as a human right, as a sociological phenomenon, as a political phenomenon. But it's not going to happen because elites agree to it or because people at the halls of Congress suddenly decide to write a law. It's going to come from the same way that big changes have happened in this country through mobilization and grassroots activism. And that's exactly what I want to say, that this movement and this particular meeting that you're holding is very important. Now, of course, we all know why recognizing right to housing and with so many other rights recognized in Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that are essential for a decent standard of living for everyone in the world is so important. Healthcare or social security, protection from destitution in old age, and so on and so forth. There is the constitutional and political importance, but also a cultural transformation in the way in which we prioritize things in society, and in the decisions that we make, and also in the way in which we teach about things, and the way in which we do knowledge building. And that's been very important for me as an academic. What sort of things we see students prioritizing as valid knowledge as opposed to other forms of knowledge. Now, it's housing as a human right is also terribly important, of course, because there is a massive global housing crisis, and has been one for the last several decades, but which has worsened progressively over time, as we have seen with the rise in the number of evictions and homelessness, and we have seen with the rise of speculation and landlessness, and the rise in corporate ownership of property, and so on and so forth. At the moment of this crisis, coronavirus hit. It was a terrible time. Housing was already in crisis. There was already a pandemic before the pandemic actually broke out, and I'm talking about the question of evictions, for example, as a pandemic. It was a pandemic of evictions, and when the coronavirus hit, it was obvious that it was going to have a huge impact on many sectors, but particularly on housing, because the responses that governments have designed to respond to the coronavirus have been essentially that people should stay at home under lockdown orders. And so home has emerged as the sort of the front line in the defense against the virus. So the question of a right to a home is more important than ever, if anything, before the coronavirus actually, hit us. Everyone needs a home, and unfortunate reality is that many people don't have a home, or if they have a home, they are not safe homes, and they are not adequate. The question of safety and adequacy are central to my mandate, and there is a continuous assessment of what they are. So it is because of that, and because of the importance of the question of home and housing to COVID-19, that I decided to focus my first report as the UN rapporteur, which is actually to the UN General Assembly. The report has been written, and the report is going to focus on COVID-19 and its impact and relationship with right to adequate housing. Homelessness, of course, is a big part of it. And we put out a call. I basically put out a call for submissions and sharing of information from states, from local governments, from civil society organizations, from UN agencies and others, from expert bodies. And I'm happy to say that we received an unprecedented number of submissions. Over 200 submissions were received. Although the time given was only 3 weeks, it was astonishing, and I'm very grateful for all the submissions that were received. And based on those submissions, and based on, of course, my own analysis, this report has been prepared. And what I can tell you right now, I know that the focus of this conversation is on many issues, but on homelessness as well. And I would like to say that homelessness, as discussed in the report, has two sides to it. On the one hand, there is a tremendous number of people who already were homeless before the coronavirus hit. For example, the United States, over 500,000 people very easily homeless, at least counting, conservatively. But the crisis threatens to make the homelessness situation far worse. If anything, it could push it into a catastrophic territory, especially as the various patchwork eviction bans that were adopted at the local levels in the United States come to an end, and many people become homeless, or they're pushed out of their homes for other reasons, or they lose their incomes, and the support in the form of the additional payments under the CARES Act actually comes to an end, and there is no further support system. The economic impact of that could push a lot more people into homelessness. And the number of people as they are pushed into homelessness could sort of tip over into a crisis, the likes of which we have not seen. So we certainly anticipate that. And it's not only the United States. In most countries around the world, same story. Many patchwork temporary bans were put in place, but they all came to an end or have come to an end. So the question is that the virus shows no sign of slowing down, and countries are scrambling to figure out what to do. But this is one side of the story. The other side of the story that's coming out in the report is also that the issue is not all hopeless. In fact, many governments have adopted temporary measures against homelessness, and some have been actually quite successful. Britain, for example, has radically reduced the number of what they call rough sleepers in Britain in a way that has not happened since the 1960s. And I would say there are many local government measures that have been taken in the United States as well, some better than others. For example, dealing with the question of encampments, you find that, local governments like Oakland have done better than certain other local governments, which have actually gone on to break up encampments, for example. So these kinds of issues have also reminded us that it is still possible, even in the middle of a pandemic, to respond positively to tackle the problem of homelessness. And many governments seem to be able to do quite a bit under these circumstances. So we should hold governments to a higher standard and push for better results from governments to remind them of their obligations under international law, which involves protecting the right to adequate housing. So the question for me, for me as a mandate holder in the UN, perhaps I can say a few words about what that actually means, and then how that connects with kind of the grassroots mobilizations that, like yours, that we are seeing around the world. So of course, as most of you probably have seen from the description of the mandate, UN rapporteurs are independent experts who are appointed by states in order to provide leadership on particular issues for a certain number of years. They're basically individuals who do not represent their governments. They are not paid by the United Nations either. They are simply people who are appointed in the individual capacity, and part of their job involves reporting on matters of concern in their areas of specialization. If it is housing or freedom of expression or right to food or many of those issues, it involves reporting to the UN General Assembly as well as to the UN Human Rights Council. It also involves, of course, interacting with states continuously, both on complaints that we receive on a day-to-day basis. Evictions, for example, everyday eviction complaints have been flooding into my agenda since I took over in May from around the world. So you have to decide how to deal with them. Involves very often very formal engagements with governments, and other times more informal engagements. And so there is both a formal as well as an informal sort of side to this mandate. And particularly, I would say, I mean, both are important for grassroots movements and civil society organizations. Formal engagements, for example, could include, registering complaints about ongoing violations of housing rights, evictions, for example, or homelessness or other issues. They could also involve formal contributions to UN processes, like, for example, the contributions that fed into my report, for example, or contributions that also feed into other UN processes. The states at the UN, which involve the United States typically, but currently the US is not a member of the UN Human Rights Council because it withdrew from the UN Human Rights Council in 2018. But there is a peer review mechanism at the UN Human Rights Council where countries kind of every 5 years check each other's records to see how they're doing. And it's a very formal, very thorough process of review. And civil society organizations and grassroots groups play a huge role in holding the feet of the governments to the fire. When governments come there and say, hey, we are doing great, last 5 years, there were no issues at all, the civil society organization will come up and say, what are you talking about? We've got clear evidence that things are actually not as rosy as you say they are. So this is a very important moment of truth telling and accountability, because for many governments, this is really the only moment when they face any form of accountability. Because when they go back home to their own national capitals, they really have no accountability. They usually, many of them are repressive governments that have eliminated their opposition. So nobody's there to question them within their own country. There is no independent media. There is nothing really, except at the global level when, at least for a brief period, there is some truth telling. So these moments continue to be terribly important, the formal moments. But the informal moments, I think, are equally important. The informal moments include moments like this. For example, events in which you interact with UN rapporteurs and mechanisms. And I'm not the only one, there are other people who you could potentially interact with in the UN as well. And those moments are very important. But also another informal ways of interacting with the UN involves the two-way process of the UN relying on you. For example, I'm relying on reporting from groups like yours to make my recommendations to states in my report, but it could be the other way around as well. You rely on the UN reports to make your advocacy or your strategies, to craft them, to sort of align them with international legal and international human rights goals. Network building is a huge part of this informal interaction, which I think in some ways is more important than anything else. And that's kind of where I can conclude, especially because movement building and network building, and I see law at the margins, of course, is very much a believer in the strategies of movement lawyering. Movement lawyering, of course, involves movement, moments like these, networks like these, to insert people from different levels, including at the UN, into multi-level movements that can actually mobilize successfully for goals that seem out of reach all the time, like advocating for the right to adequate housing. So I guess I just stop there, and I'm happy to interact. But thank you for inviting me, and best of luck with all of your challenges. We are living at a very challenging moment, but I also see a tremendous amount of grassroots innovation happening, and I see a lot of changes which we never thought possible in the housing area happening. Rent control is back in action, back in conversation, which it has not been, again, for decades. As I said, problems like homelessness have been tackled, although temporarily, in countries like the UK in a way that was not possible to imagine even a few years ago. So the big question is, how do we build on the current moment on the successes that we do see and, go forward in a way that actually substantially entrench the right to adequate housing as a human right. So let me express my solidarity with all of you in your struggles. And
do you have time for just one question? We had a couple questions in the chat
of course,
here.
no, I'm more than
Okay,
happy.
great. So one thing in the group chats and also in this side chat that we've been talking a lot about is that often the policies don't reflect the needs and concerns of people who are homeless or unhoused. And often we do have issues getting the government to listen more to the people who are actually experiencing these things. So how, you're working with the UN, how do we transfer more power at the government level to people in those communities? And is there a better way to focus on local, state, and federal government, or how they interact with those communities?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I would say first thing is run for elections and, be the local government yourself. Capture power, and then you're going to change things. And it is happening in many parts of the US. I see that. And some of my former students have run for elections at the local level. One is running for, a councilwoman, for example, in LA. I mean, this is an unalterable reality. To change things, you have to capture power. But on the other hand, power, this is only one form of power, the electoral power, or formal political power. But there is a broader question of the power of discourse and the power of expertise that governments rely on in order to sanction their own policies, for example. How do we change that? How do we challenge that? There, I would strongly urge you to engage with UN mechanisms and with other expert bodies, particularly with my mandate. If on particular policy changes you have a coordinated struggle going on to advocate for specific changes, engage with my office, and maybe I can formally or informally put pressure on governments, so the pressure could come from both directions, coming from below, from movements such as yours, and supplemented by or assisted by some whatever pressure I can or others can bring from the top. So that is another thing I would say. The last thing I would say with regard to local governments is that it's very important to build allies, within local governments, one or two, even when it seems like, the overall system is against, there is always somebody inside, who is willing to listen and is more open than others. And I found that often changes happen incrementally, one step at a time, or two steps forward, one step backward, rather than going straight from point A from 0 to 100 in one push. But definitely my advice would be to engage more with my mandate, and much of the information about how to do that is very easily discoverable online. But basically, it's just an email address, srhousing@oschr.org, and you could just email it. And I have staff monitoring emails continuously, and they can also be available for conversation, and more than happy to, engage directly as well.
Great. I think we have time for maybe one more question. Can you, there's often sort of this arbitrary line that we draw between people who are homeless and people who are housed. Can you talk about sort of the fluidity of that? Of course, this question says the end of homelessness is a home, but what does it mean to have an adequate home?
Right, exactly. It's a great question. It's a very important question, and usually in international human rights terms, the more conventional answer or normal answer is to say an adequate home is one that is decent enough for normal living. That is, you think of it more as a minimum requirement, a floor. This is the least that you should have. That involves, for example, the building quality, the space for individuals, the physical dimensions of the house, but also the question of affordability, the question of cultural adequacy. I mean, there are different elements of the right to housing. There are 7 elements of the right to housing that are described and analyzed in international human rights law. And much of them try to capture that. But having said that, the question of what a home is on a continuum is a very important question. And in the United States, I would say this has starkly come up in the case of encampments, which I referred to briefly in my discussion. Some local governments during the pandemic actually, unfortunately, ignored CDC guidelines on encampments and decided to, disband them, thus increasing the risks of transmission of the virus much more among both the people living in the encampments as well as those in the wider community. But other city governments have not done that. For example, Oakland did not do that. Chico did not do that. So there are many governments that did not do that. But is an encampment, for example, a safe and adequate housing? Well, according to the standards of normal housing, an encampment is not quite adequate yet. But to disband the encampment, to treat it as though it is not a home or a house at all, depends on whether alternatives are available. If all that people have is at any given moment an encampment, then taking a forcible action to disband an encampment is a violation of international human rights law. Very similar to, for example, the debates we see in developing countries where we have vast so-called slums or informal settlements. The homes that they live in are not quite safe or adequate, as we all know. But on the other hand, to treat those dwellings as though they have no meaning and to readily engage in evicting them as though they have no right to be living there in the first place is also a terrible violation of international law.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to pass it over to Chaumtoli. Thank you again for coming today and for taking a couple extra questions. It's really helpful to hear from you. Really appreciate you coming. I think there's Chaumtoli.
Hi. Yeah, I also, and in the spirit of the rapporteur asking folks to engage directly, I want to give folks, I know we have a lot of organizers here. Does anyone have direct questions before I kind of wind down and close our day? It's been a phenomenal day. I'm just really moved by it, but I want to just make sure if folks have other questions. I do think that we will take you up on the offer to engage with you. I think that from today Reggie, do you want to?
Yeah, I wanted to
introduce yourself and then, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask this one question because I heard Mr. Rapago talk about Article 25, which talks about housing, but I wanted to kind of ask him about Article 17, which talks about no nation should arbitrarily deprive one of property, and what does that mean in terms of actually having that in writing? You know what I'm saying? Like, what does that mean, and how should we be using that?
Right.
That will be our last one, and then yeah, great.
Okay. Thank you, Reggie, for that question. Now, I just want to say that the right to property, of course, is mentioned as one of the rights in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But conventionally in international law, right to property is a much more debated or controversial right. Many countries don't accept it as a human right. They may accept it as a legal right, which is a distinction, but not as a fundamental right of humans. That's the reason you find that while Article 17 exists in the UDHR, if you actually look forward to the more legally binding international legal agreements, you know that Universal Declaration of Human Rights itself is not legally binding. It's technically a General Assembly resolution, which was adopted by countries by consensus with some abstentions. And over time, countries have come to refer to it. Many people around the world have come to know about it, but it's not a legally binding document. To be legally binding, uh, typically in international law, you have to have something which is a treaty or an international legal agreement. And there is an international legal agreement that does confirm housing as a human right. Article 11 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. There were two legal agreements that built on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was passed in 1948. And these two international treaties were adopted in 1966-67. And the United States has ratified or legally enforced one of them, which is the first one, which deals with issues like freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, religion, and so on. It's called the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. But the US has not so far agreed to enforce the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which has all the rights like housing and right to social security and food, the issues that matter for the most marginalized are mentioned there. Article 11 of that convention actually legally protects the right to housing, but there is no protection in that convention or in any other convention for the right to property. So my straight answer to you on the question of Article 17 is that Article 17 is one of those areas of international human rights law where there isn't complete legal agreement. And typically in housing rights advocacy, we like to keep the question of property rights separate from housing rights, not to confuse the two, because property advocacy, unfortunately, can also be hijacked and be deployed for very regressive ends by, you know, by many around the world. And one reason why it has turned out to be more controversial over the years. I hope that answers your question, or unless I misunderstood the purpose of what do we do with Article 17 as it's currently written. If did I answer that question?
I think we might sort of hold that, or connect you. I think some of the issue, just as an interest to sort of wind down, if that's okay, Reggie. And I think some of the strategies, you know, Professor, were about reclaiming property. That's the work that Nita B. and Oakland. I mean, I think one of the reasons why the city wasn't successful in Oakland, you know, for my 2 cents, is because there was this massive grassroots mobilization and reclaiming the property and space. And I believe the same thing happened in New York and other localities. So there is this sort of separating it isn't necessarily going to be helpful. But so in the interest of time, because we wanted to wind down at 5:30, I want to first thank you, you know, tremendously for giving your time and to being with us, and to also generously extending your office to engage with each of us. And, you know, after this conference and this gathering, we will sort of may take that up and to see informal ways of engagement, because as we know that our localities and definitely the federal government is nowhere near wanting to, to provide any basic rights, let alone housing, and it's going to be increasingly repressive, as we see in Portland. I want to invite Eric to share a little bit about the, just close us out with the Right to Home project, and the next steps, and then I'll just sort of also just close our session for today. This is just a really phenomenal beginning. But Eric, if you wanted to just share some words before I close out for today.
Yes, thank you, Chaumtoli. Thank you, Rapporteur, for joining us, and thank you, everyone, for being here today. It's been a great event, a great program, really inspiring, and these are challenging times for a world, unprecedented times, and I think it's important that we think about solutions in a new way, and that's what we're doing. That was the goal of this project. It was to look at homelessness with the homeless community, not just about them. And we reported on, we started this project many months ago at the beginning of 2019. And here we are in the middle of 2020. The world has changed a lot, but homelessness is still a big problem. But I think, some great ideas came out of this today. And I think it's important to move these forward. Incremental change is how we're going to get things done. And each time we gather together, each time we do work together, there's collective strength in that. We have people joining us for this event from all over the country, and that's powerful. We have to keep this going. It's just the beginning. It might be kind of the end of part one of this project, so to speak, but this is an ongoing project. We're not going to stop till it ends, till we end homelessness. That's the goal, and it is an achievable goal. And that's what we're going to keep working towards. If you want to, help, if you have ideas how we can collaborate, with Law at the Margins, if you would like to collaborate with Law at the Margins, reach out to us. Go to the website, you can reach out to me directly, you can reach out to Chaumtoli, but there's different ways. We're always open to collaboration opportunities. And again, one last thing is, I think working in this community, I've learned a lot in this process, but I also think that this kind of work can be tireless, it's being never ending. It can also be thankless. And I think I just want to take a moment to thank everyone, show gratitude for the work that you're doing. It's appreciated. And just remember that, you have allies, there are people, and we just need to get more allies so that we can strengthen this movement. We can end homelessness. So thank you all.
Great. So I want to just end with a couple of thanks. So first of all, the Right to Home project is a collaboration with 4 street newspapers throughout the country. They were very much instrumental towards putting together today's event. StreetWise Chicago, Street Spirit in Oakland, Street Sense Media in DC, and also the contributor in Nashville. Each of the editors you met at the beginning of the session. I want to, again, give enormous amount of gratitude to Eric Falquero, Alastair Boone, to Amanda Haggard, and to Suzanne Hanney. These are folks who are maintaining local papers that are directly working with unhoused communities, oftentimes severely under-resourced, actually always under-resourced. And so, that they sort of joined in and saw the power of media and advocacy. And together, I think I just want to first give a shout out. Please support them, support their work if you're in Oakland, DC, Nashville, and Chicago. Because I think that it's really important that, I think Reggie said, it's like, we need to get our stories sort of out there. I want to also give a shout out to our panelists. So panel 1, I think it's important to name folks. Couper from House the Bay. My brain said Marcus Moore from Picture the Homeless. Look at my notes. Sorry. Am I forgetting? No. And Reggie Black, who moderated that panel, and my brain is stopped for a moment here. Help me out. I'll come back to it.
Vicky Batcher.
Yeah, Vicky, are you there? I owe you. Vicky Batcher, who's one of our contributors, writers from Nashville.
Thank you.
Yeah, Vicky. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the invite. I had a wonderful time. I really did.
Great, excellent. And I want to thank our panel 2, which is on solutions. Alastair Boone moderating that session with Selena Trall at Vocal New York, Nita B from the Village, Oakland, Zachary Johnson from Call to Action in Minnesota, and Kyle Arbuckle from the Low Income Housing Coalition. Also, during this time, I came to know that Steve and TJ have been at MAP, have been doing some archiving and some tweeting. And, you know, I think that sometimes while we're making these gatherings, we have to tell our own story. And that's kind of in many ways how Loud the Margins was sort of born. So I want to shout out for all of you who've been doing that. Of course, to all of our participants who are experts in doing this work, I want to sort of thank you for joining us today. And of course, Eric Ortiz, who's the executive editor who you spoke from, who was pretty much kind of leading for us. We're an entirely volunteer effort. We all have other jobs that kind of pay our rent, myself included, I guess. And so if you liked what you saw, you want to see more of it, I think Marcus Moore said it earlier, is we got to fundraise for ourselves. We got to support the work that we want to see, so support us to do that. And then finally, last but not least, there are 2 people who are instrumental to putting this together, and you did not see them at all. And one is Morgan Moon. Morgan Moon is our associate editor. You might have gotten a lot of emails from her and from me, and so she has been sort of behind the scenes, and I want to give a shout out to Morgan. And then finally, I want to give a shout out to Albert Garcia, who's our tech producer. He has been committed to ensuring, despite connectivity, despite all the challenges, to ensure that the voices of those who are unhoused are brought to this program. So I want to also thank Albert as well. And finally, I believe one of our interns, Laura, is been sort of tweeting and chatting and getting this sort of space engaged. I hope I haven't forgotten anyone. If I have, my apologies, but have a wonderful, blessed evening. And this is really just the beginning. I think it's to kind of build the networks, to share the stories regarding mobilizing folks around solutions. And then we need to really push the decision makers to really make you know, housing and other sort of human rights a reality. I think that's going to be upon us to do. Again, finally, thanks again to our special rapporteur. I know your work as a movement person, and I'm very much thrilled that you are occupying this position, because we feel like maybe this may truly become a reality. With that, I think we will sign off for today. It's been a long day, a good day, and take care.